The salt air off the Chesapeake Bay always carried a specific kind of melancholy for me. Here in Annapolis, where history clung to cobblestone streets and the water whispered against docked sailboats, my life had been meticulously rebuilt, piece by painstaking piece. But beneath the polished surface of routine, a different kind of history lay buried, festering, waiting. My name is Sylvie Morrow, and for years I've been watching. My current life was quiet, almost unnervingly so. A small, well-kept house with a view of the water I rarely truly appreciated, a routine built around solitary pursuits, long walks by the docks, hours spent reading in the quiet library, the simple act of tending the small garden in my yard. On the outside, I was just another woman in her late 30s, living a peaceful existence. People saw a calm demeanor, maybe a touch reserved, but harmless. They didn't see the coiled tension beneath, the mind that rarely stopped analyzing, planning, waiting. They didn't see the observant nature that missed nothing, the patient discipline that had sustained me through years of quiet suffering, or the ruthless core that was slowly hardening into something unbreakable. Years ago, this city had been different for me. It held the promise of a bright future, a career I poured my life into, relationships built on trust and shared dreams. Then, Robert Sterling arrived. He was a corporate shark, smooth-talking and utterly without conscience. His maneuvering, a series of calculated lies and power plays disguised as business strategy, didn't just cost me my job, it dismantled my entire life. It took everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, and scattered the pieces like dust in the wind. He moved on, richer and more powerful, leaving behind a ruin that took me years to crawl out of. The memory of that time, the betrayal, the sheer helplessness, was the engine that ran beneath my quiet life. It was my motivation, a constant, low hum of righteous fury. I had tried initially to fight back through conventional means. Legal avenues, appeals, exposing his actions through proper channels. It was futile. He had insulated himself perfectly, his wealth and connections forming an impenetrable shield. That's when the waiting began. I knew I couldn't beat him in his arena, not conventionally. I had to find another way. A way that bypassed his defenses, struck at his vulnerabilities, a way only someone with immense patience could uncover. He still lived in Annapolis, of course. Moved into one of the grand houses overlooking the Severn River, a picture of success. Married, children, the perfect public facade. I saw him sometimes, from a distance, at community events he sponsored, his face plastered on local charity brochures, stepping out of expensive cars. Each sighting was a small, sharp twist of the knife, but it also served a purpose. I watched him, observing the polished performance, the forced smiles, looking for cracks in the armor. Then came the strange little saga of the juvenile harassment. A group of people I knew, mostly acquaintances who shared a vague dislike for Sterling, perhaps he'd been dismissive to them too, or they simply found his inherited wealth and arrogance offensive, decided to engage in a peculiar form of low-grade psychological warfare. They started sending him audio clips. Not threats, not blackmail, but something far stranger, born of pure juvenile annoyance. Sounds of digestion taken to an extreme. Specifically, the rather graphic sounds of diarrhea hitting a toilet bowl. It sounds utterly ridiculous, I know. When I first heard about it, a part of me dismissed it as pathetic and pointless. Why waste energy on something so childish against a man who deserved true comeuppance? But the observant part of my nature couldn't let it go. I started paying closer attention, not to the people sending the clips, but to Sterling. I knew he was receiving them. They talked about the read receipts, the timestamps. He wasn't blocking the numbers. He wasn't reporting them. He was simply receiving them. This was the hook, the tiny, glittering thread that snagged my attention. A man like Robert Sterling, who cultivated an image of absolute control, wealth, and power, a man who crushed lives without blinking, was being subjected to this bizarre, undignified annoyance, and he was doing nothing. He was listening to audio clips of bodily functions hitting water and seemingly letting it wash over him without a ripple. This wasn't the reaction of a normal person, annoyed or otherwise. This was the reaction of someone deliberately choosing not to react, and that was fascinating. I started encouraging the acquaintances, subtly at first. "Oh, you sent him what? How did he take it?" Feigning amusement. I'd pump them for details, the timestamps, the frequency, any minute change in his public behavior they might notice. My observant mind worked overtime, piecing together fragmented reports. The stories were always the same. He saw the message, opened it, the read receipt appeared, and then nothing, just back to his perfectly manicured life. It was during one of these quiet, contemplative walks by the water, the salt air doing little to soothe my restless mind, that the full realization hit me. His lack of reaction wasn't him ignoring it because it was beneath him. It was too consistent, too deliberate. It felt like a performance of indifference. And why would a man like Sterling need to perform indifference to something so trivial? Unless he couldn't afford any reaction. Unless any acknowledgement, any sign of being rattled by something so small, would expose a far greater vulnerability. This wasn't just juvenile harassment. For me, Sylvie Morrow, the woman whose life he had ruined, it was an entry point. The strange anomaly of his non-reaction cracked open a possibility. It revealed a chink in the armor I hadn't anticipated. It was the perfect weakness to exploit for the more serious, long-planned revenge that had been simmering within me for years. My patience had finally found its opportunity. My ruthlessness began to stir from its long slumber. I decided then and there. The juvenile annoyance would continue, a useful cover, a distraction, but my focus would shift entirely. I wouldn't send audio clips. I would use the insight gained from his bizarre reaction to craft something devastating, something that would shatter the perfect facade he so carefully maintained. Robert Sterling may have ignored the sound of discomfort hitting water, but he wouldn't be able to ignore the sound of his own world crashing down. The time for quiet waiting was over. The time for orchestration had begun. The shadow I had lived under for so long was about to fall over him. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 2. Struggle, the desperation and descent into darkness, the decision, solidified into cold, hard resolve. The abstract idea of retribution, the simmering resentment I'd nursed for years, now had a tangible path. Sterling's peculiar reaction to the juvenile harassment wasn't just an oddity. It was a clue, a breadcrumb trail leading to a deeper secret or a profound fear he desperately concealed. My observant nature devoured this possibility. What was he hiding that made him absorb such petty attacks without a flicker of response? My patience shifted from enduring my own pain to the meticulous, unseen labor of dismantling his life. My inherent ruthlessness, once a theoretical possibility, became the necessary tool for the job. My days didn't change outwardly, but internally everything shifted. The quiet routine became a cloak for intense, focused work. I spent hours in libraries, not reading fiction, but poring over financial records, corporate filings, property deeds, news archives dating back years. I cross-referenced every bit of information I could find on Sterling, his companies, his associates, the specific period when my life was destroyed. My observant trait helped me spot discrepancies, subtle connections others might miss, names that appeared repeatedly in different contexts. The initial phase was frustratingly slow. Sterling was, as expected, incredibly well protected. Lawyers, accountants, layers of shell corporations, he had built a fortress of legality and obfuscation. The corporate maneuvering that ruined me had been executed with precision, leaving no obvious legal recourse. Trying to find a direct line from his past actions to a current, exploitable vulnerability felt like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. There were moments of despair, where the sheer scale of his defenses felt overwhelming, and the quiet voice of doubt whispered that perhaps he was untouchable. These struggles weren't just external, they were deeply internal. Revisiting the past wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a painful excavation of trauma. Remembering the day I lost everything, the look on Sterling's face, smooth, devoid of empathy, sent shivers of cold rage through me. The financial ruin was one thing, but it was the destruction of my reputation, the loss of my professional identity, the way friends and colleagues distanced themselves because of the scandal he fabricated, that truly cut deep. It felt like he hadn't just taken my career, he had stolen my future, my sense of self-worth. These memories fueled my motivation, sharpening my resolve. The casual indifference he showed then mirrored his current non-reaction to the harassment, reinforcing my belief that his placid surface hid something rotten. I started employing more unconventional methods, discreet inquiries, posing as potential clients or researchers. I even learned basic digital forensics, sifting through publicly available data online, looking for metadata, connected accounts, anything that could provide a lead. My patience was constantly tested. Days blurred into weeks, then months, filled with dead ends and false starts. There were times I would sit alone in my quiet house, surrounded by stacks of papers and glowing computer screens, and the weight of it all would feel crushing. The isolation of my task, The fact that I couldn't share the true depth of my purpose with anyone added another layer of burden. The acquaintance group continued their bizarre audio assault. I kept tabs on it, using it as a bizarre barometer. His consistent lack of reaction was the anomaly I couldn't ignore. It had to mean something significant. Was it arrogance? Did he genuinely not care? Or was it fear? Was he terrified that any response, even telling them to stop, might draw unwanted attention, might uncover something far worse? My observant mind leaned towards the latter. The total absence of reaction felt like the unnatural stillness before a storm, the deliberate suppression of a tremor. My plan began to take shape, not as a single decisive blow, but as a series of interconnected actions designed to probe the vulnerabilities his non-reaction hinted at. I needed to find the pressure point that would make his controlled world unravel. The juvenile harassment was noise he could filter out. I needed to become the signal he couldn't ignore. This required patience, precision, and a willingness to step closer to the fire. The stakes escalated when my investigations began to brush up against more sensitive areas. I started looking into the specifics of the corporate takeover that had ruined me. It was complex, involving shell companies and offshore accounts. As I dug deeper, I began to suspect that what had happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. There were whispers, rumors from that time, about other people who had been squeezed out, other businesses that had been dismantled in a similarly ruthless fashion. My observant trait noticed a pattern, a signature of Sterling's work. This new angle revealed potential collaborators for Sterling, people who might have been complicit or who were also victims. But it also increased the risk. Poking into those old wounds could attract unwanted attention. I had to move carefully, like a surgeon, making precise incisions, gathering information without alerting the body. The fear of being discovered was a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach. My quiet life in Annapolis felt increasingly fragile, a thin disguise over the dangerous operation I was conducting. There was a specific setback that pushed me further into the darkness. I had managed to make contact indirectly with someone who had also suffered under Sterling's actions years ago. They were initially hesitant, scared. I used all my skills of persuasion, my carefully honed patience, building trust slowly. I shared just enough of my story, enough to create a bond of shared grievance. They finally agreed to share some information, a small piece of the puzzle related to offshore holdings Sterling had used. But just as I was about to receive the crucial details, contact was abruptly cut off. Days later, I saw a small notice in the local paper. The person had suddenly left the country, citing unexpected personal matters. My observant mind pieced it together instantly. Sterling knew. Not about me specifically, perhaps, but he knew someone was asking questions about the past. His network was wider, his defenses more sophisticated than I had anticipated. This wasn't just a setback, it was a warning. He was aware that someone was probing. This incident plunged me into a period of intense fear and paranoia. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every unfamiliar car on my street felt like surveillance. This was my rock-bottom moment in Act 2. The realization that my careful plan had nearly been exposed, that Sterling was actively protecting his past, brought the full weight of the danger crashing down on me. It felt like the end. The years of waiting, planning, suffering, all culminating in near exposure and failure. But as the initial wave of fear subsided, something else took hold. The near miss didn't break me. It tempered me. It burned away the last vestiges of hesitation. The thought of giving up, of letting Sterling win again, was more unbearable than the fear of getting caught. His swift action to silence a potential witness proved how important the past was to him, how much he had to hide. My motivation, the deep-seated need for retribution for what he had done to me, solidified into an unshakable resolve. My patience transformed into cold endurance. My observant trait became hypervigilant, seeing threats everywhere, forcing me to be even more meticulous. And my ruthlessness, once a latent possibility, became an active necessity. I couldn't afford to be anything less. I knew now that my plan had to be faster, more decisive, and far more disruptive. It couldn't be a slow unraveling, it had to be a calculated demolition. The close call had shown me Sterling's ruthlessness, but it had also confirmed his vulnerability. He had something to hide, something he would actively silence to protect. My role as the orchestrator of his downfall took on a new, grim significance. I had to be smarter, colder, more precise than ever before. The juvenile harassment continued in the background, a bizarre, low-frequency hum that Sterling continued to absorb without reaction. It was a perfect mirror for his carefully constructed life, a surface of calm over a churning, hidden reality. My revenge would pierce that surface and expose everything beneath. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 3. Revenge, the reckoning, its execution, and the aftermath. The fear from the near exposure didn't dissipate entirely, but it was transmuted into fuel. It sharpened my focus, honing my observant nature to an almost unbearable degree. I felt the threat, the constant potential for detection, but it no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it acted as a powerful accelerant, pushing me to refine my plan with a chilling efficiency. The rock bottom of realizing how close I came to being discovered and how ruthlessly Sterling protected himself cemented my own ruthlessness. There was no turning back now. My motivation wasn't just about reclaiming what I lost. It was about dismantling the power structure that allowed men like Sterling to ruin lives with impunity. I abandoned the slower, probing approach. I needed to hit him where he was most vulnerable, using the knowledge I'd gained about his past deceptions and his current paranoia, which his bizarre reaction to the juvenile harassment had initially hinted at. His unwillingness to even swat at a fly told me he was guarding against tigers. My revenge needed to be the tiger. My target became his carefully constructed reputation and the hidden financial architecture that supported it. The key piece of information, the one I pieced together from scattered records and coded entries, wasn't just that he had offshore accounts, but that he had used them to facilitate highly questionable, potentially illegal, transactions related to hostile takeovers and the silencing of dissenting parties years ago, including, indirectly, what happened to me. The person who had fled the country had almost given me proof of a specific transfer, linked to a specific, illegal corporate maneuver. I didn't have their information, but I had enough circumstantial evidence, combined with my own detailed history of his actions, to paint a compelling, damning picture. The challenge was presenting this picture in a way that couldn't be buried, couldn't be litigated into silence, and would cause maximum damage to the facade he so desperately maintained. My patience had taught me the value of timing. My observant nature had shown me how Sterling operated, his need for control, his reliance on public image. My ruthlessness dictated that the blow must be precise and devastating. The plan I orchestrated was complex, requiring multiple steps executed with perfect timing. It wasn't about direct confrontation, it was about triggering a chain reaction. Step 1 involved creating a digital footprint. I carefully constructed an anonymous online presence, using layers of proxies and encrypted connections that would be almost impossible to trace. This wasn't about sending threats. It was about planting seeds of information in obscure corners of the internet, old financial forums, corporate watchdog blogs, places where financial jargon and complex legal maneuvers were discussed. These seeds were fragments of truth mixed with speculation, pointing towards irregularities in Sterling's past dealings, referencing specific dates, company names, and types of transactions I had uncovered. My observant trait ensured these fragments were just specific enough to be intriguing to someone knowledgeable, but vague enough to be dismissed as unsubstantiated rumors initially. Step 2 involved leveraging the persistent, juvenile harassment. This was the most cunning part. The audio clips, the memes, Sterling's strange non-reaction had been my initial clue. I theorized that he couldn't react because any attention, any investigation into who was harassing him might lead back to something he wanted hidden. The very triviality of the harassment was his blind spot. He absorbed the small annoyance to avoid the larger exposure. I needed to use this. I subtly fed the acquaintance group information about Sterling's routines, his public appearances. Not for more harassment, but to time the next phase. Step 3 was the catalyst. I created a series of anonymous tips sent to various regulatory bodies, financial journalists, and investigative reporters. These tips were professionally written, devoid of emotion, citing the specific types of transactions and irregularities I had found, pointing to the online breadcrumbs I had laid in step 1. I didn't make accusations. I asked questions, posed hypothetical scenarios based on the information I had gathered. The language was dry, technical, designed to appeal to professionals who dealt with complex financial crimes. My patient research allowed me to use the correct terminology, making the tips seem credible. The timing was crucial. I sent these tips during a period when Sterling was highly visible, chairing a major charity event, giving interviews about his business success. The contrast between his public persona and the veiled accusations in the tips was designed to create cognitive dissonance, to make the recipients take notice. I even timed some tips to arrive shortly after one of the juvenile harassment audio clips was sent, creating a bizarre juxtaposition that, I hoped, would make the recipients dig deeper into why this prominent man was being subjected to such odd, persistent annoyance without reaction. My observant nature anticipated that someone connecting the dots might wonder what kind of secrets a man had that made him tolerate public digital humiliation rather than draw attention. The chain reaction began slowly, almost imperceptibly. A quiet inquiry from a financial journalist. A subtle question posed during an interview that seemed to catch Sterling off guard, though he quickly regained his composure. My observant eyes saw the minute flicker of unease, a satisfaction that fed my ruthless determination. Then, the pace quickened. Regulatory bodies, prompted by the tips and perhaps sensing something genuinely amiss given the odd context of the harassment, began preliminary reviews. These reviews were initially confidential, but in the world Sterling inhabited, whispers traveled fast. My vengeance wasn't a single explosion, but a controlled implosion. The whispers turned into rumors. The rumors turned into hushed questions from business associates, board members. Sterling's perfect facade began to show strain. He couldn't address the rumors directly without acknowledging them, drawing more attention. He couldn't find the source of the tips. My digital footprint was too carefully obscured. And he still couldn't react to the juvenile harassment without potentially linking himself to the unwanted scrutiny. He was trapped by his own need for control and secrecy, hoisted by the very petard his non-reaction had created. The climax arrived not in a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet collapse of his carefully constructed world. The regulatory reviews escalated into formal investigations. Financial institutions he relied on began to distance themselves, citing unforeseen complications. Business deals fell apart. His reputation, the bedrock of his power, crumbled under the weight of suspicion and the relentless, low-grade pressure I had orchestrated. The juvenile harassment continued, a bizarre footnote in the unfolding disaster, a constant reminder of the initial crack I had exploited. I watched it happen from a distance, my observant trait cataloging every public sign of his downfall, panic statements to the press, the cancellation of public appearances, the haunted look in his eyes the one time I saw him from across a street. His reaction now was starkly different from his non-reaction to the audio clips. He was frantic, visibly desperate, thrashing against forces he couldn't see or control. He was finally reacting, but it was too late. My patient planning had ensured that. The aftermath was profound. Sterling faced severe financial penalties, lawsuits from former associates, and the complete destruction of his professional standing. His family life, once a shield, was now exposed to the harsh glare of public scandal. He lost the grand house, the cars, the effortless lifestyle built on the ruins of others' lives. He wasn't jailed, which some might see as a failure, but my revenge wasn't about incarceration. It was about dismantling his power and exposing his true nature. He was forced to confront the consequences of his actions, stripped of the wealth and influence that had protected him for so long. For me, the consequences were more complex. There was no triumphant celebration, no feeling of pure elation. There was a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance restored, but it was tempered by the emptiness that often follows the achievement of a long-held, consuming goal. The ruthlessness required to execute my plan had changed me. I was no longer the person whose life Sterling had ruined years ago. I was Sylvie Morrow, the orchestrator who had waited patiently, observed keenly, and acted ruthlessly. The years of pain hadn't magically disappeared, but the weight of injustice had been lifted. I continued my quiet life in Annapolis, the salt air now carrying a different resonance. The past was no longer a festering wound, but a scar, a reminder of what I had endured and what I was capable of. Robert Sterling was gone from the public eye, his name synonymous with scandal rather than success. The strange saga of the Diarrhea audio clips faded into obscurity, a bizarre footnote only a few might remember. But I knew. I knew how a strange lack of reaction had been the key, how patience and observation had unlocked the door, and how ruthlessness had delivered the final blow. It wasn't about revenge being sweet, it was about it being necessary. It was about reclaiming a sense of agency, proving that even the most powerful facades can crumble. And as I looked out at the seemingly tranquil water, a final, surprising thought occurred to me, a twist that added another layer to the complex tapestry of events. What if Sterling's strange non-reaction wasn't just about hiding financial secrets? What if the juvenile harassment, with its focus on bodily functions, had inadvertently touched upon a deeply personal, humiliating secret he guarded even more fiercely than his finances? A secret that made him tolerate anything rather than draw attention to himself. The thought lingered, a final, chilling testament to the hidden vulnerabilities that lie beneath the surface of even the most powerful lives, and how the smallest, most undignified thing can be the key to unlocking the most devastating revenge. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.